Welcome back to Something You Can Do, a podcast for people hungry for action steps. I'm your host, KJ Kozak, and my qualifications are that I like to do things. This is the third episode in our Seasons series with educator and coach Kelly Clark, where she's been sharing how we can honor the different seasons we're in, both at a high level but also in terms of concrete day-to-day action steps. So without further ado, let's listen to the theme song of this podcast and then this wonderful interview with Kelly. So I'm once again delighted to welcome you back to the podcast for this third episode in our Seasons series. Kelly, what is something you can do?
Something you can do is make meal planning work for you. It is something that is out there in many forms across social media, magazines, print stuff. Everyone has an idea of the perfect way to meal plan. And I think it's important to use those systems, but work it in a way that actually works for you. The answer isn't just, well, meal plan. There's a little more to it. So I think something you can do is make meal planning work for you.
That's such a good and important topic because I think that there's so much kind of hidden and invisible stuff that goes into meal planning that we don't think about. And so I'm excited to kind of dive into some of that and explore what can be done under like what meal planning actually is. So, why is this something that you can do?
So for me, I fell back into the idea of meal planning when I went back to work outside the home full time and still had kids at home. There were various systems that worked up until that point. But the reality was, I was in a season where I had a spouse also working full time outside the home, and I had two kids in high school coming and going at various times of the day. And so our meal time was very often fragmented. I might see one other person from the family when it was time for me to eat my dinner or when I wanted to eat. And I also needed to take into account that my spouse and I would both be generally bringing lunches to work. The kids were still bringing food to snack on during their day. And so I needed to rethink what preparing food and having food readily available looked like. I am someone who, because of dietary restrictions and lifestyle, I prefer to eat as much as I can, that I prepare myself and that I have at home. So that was already a part of my system, grocery shopping and kind of coming up with the idea of like, well, what are we having? I had years of practice in that part, but this new idea of how to make food that various people could access at various times and that fit what they were maybe looking for in that time span, there was suddenly a whole new level. I felt like I leveled up and needed to take what I had done before and sort of change it up to fit what we needed at that time. So things suddenly, it was different than planning a grocery list that had all the ingredients for the meals we thought we wanted to eat during that week. I had to rethink from scratch what did that look like. And so through a process of trial and error for a few weeks, I finally came to a system that worked for us for a good chunk of that season of life.
That's, I think, also just so important to be thinking about like what this looks like is going to change depending on where you are in life. And so I love that layer of flexibility around this idea as well and this thing that you can do. So let's go right into it. What are the steps for figuring out this meal planning for the season that you're in?
So I think, and full disclosure, the system has changed since that time. It has developed along with the way the seasons have changed. But at that point where I felt it was really what kept us all, nourished, right? It kept food in our bodies, which was important. What worked for me then was thinking outside the box a little bit, thinking about what are the types of things that are actually going to be eaten, right? I think that's the first part. As with any kind of behavior change or habit you're trying to build, it doesn't work if you're not going to eat the food. It might look pretty in the magazine spread. It may look great on paper. Like, look at all this, and it's so economic and efficient, and all these veggies or whatever it is. If you're not going to eat the food, it doesn't matter. So at first, it was really getting some input from members of the family. Hey, what types of things do you want me to make sure I have available? Like, what's going to be helpful? For some people, that might be having breakfasts that can be heated and, taken on the go. For others, it's having, plenty of, deli meats and sandwich making stuff. For others, it might mean having crock pot meals in the freezer that you can just, dump in and go. There's a lot of different ways to approach it. But for me, the primary was everyone was old enough to take care of their own breakfast, right? We all eat breakfast at different times. So that was the easy part. That was just making sure those items were on a grocery list and went into the cabinet or fridge. I didn't have to do anything more than that. Although speaking of grocery lists, having a shared grocery note. So when any of those things ran out, I'm like, if you don't put it on the list, I don't know you need it. So that was helpful too in this busy, lots of people going in different directions time. So those things I could just put in the shopping cart if I was ordering groceries, or I could just grab when I went. But when it came to planning the meal part that I was going to take responsibility for, because I do enjoy the cooking part. Again, for some people, they loathe that. For me, I like it. Was figuring out what are the things people are going to eat. And I knew in our family that steamed broccoli, risotto or baked brown rice types of things, peeled and sliced carrots that could be used in various ways, peppers, as far as like veggies to always have on hand, and small potatoes, baby potatoes, right? I knew everyone ate those things in some shape or form. So that was sort of like the veggie part for the most part. I also knew like proteins wise, certain people in my family are huge fans of steak of some sort, salmon, chicken, shrimp. I knew that those were like, with the exception, one person doesn't eat seafood, but there was always some combination of those that would work. And then, like I said, having like potatoes, rice, risotto, or whatever. So I had these kind of basics where I knew pretty much every week our grocery list looked really boring. It would be, a family pack of boneless, skinless chicken thighs, a family pack of the, chicken tenderloins, a flat iron steak, a giant piece of salmon, the large family bags of steamable broccoli, or, frozen veggies that could be quick. So I had these like staples in mind that I knew those are the things we eat. But eating those things just plain would get real boring real fast. And so I then came up with, well, what are the kind of common ingredients that you can put together? Thankfully, like bowls was kind of a trend or becoming more of a trend at that point, of like put all the things in. And if you change it up, the sauce or the type of veggies, you could change up the whole thing. So if you imagine, if you will, that you have cooked and cubed, like grilled steak bits. You have some, I like to grill too, even in the snow. So like grilled meats, steak or chicken or shrimp. You have some, a container that has peppers and onions that have been sauteed and seasoned. You have some rice of some sort, or a mashed potato of some kind, some starchy thing. Some people could use a bread bowl. I can't use that, but so imagine you have those ingredients. Well, if you take some steak and you take some of the peppers and onions, and you throw some broccoli with it over rice, and you add soy sauce or sesame ginger sauce, you suddenly have an Asian bowl. If you take those same things, and you add a little shredded cheese and sour cream and salsa, then you have a taco Mexican kind of bowl, right? So that really became sort of the meal plan. This way, everyone could fix it to their own. I have one kiddo that really loves the Asian flavors. They could eat that. I maybe wouldn't want that. And so I could add, salsa or whatever to mine. But we could put those things together and create a fully, like a well-rounded, nourishing dinner type situation. Because like I said, the high school kids very often came home from school, ate their quote unquote dinner at 3:30, 4 o'clock. And then when they returned home after practices, rehearsals and whatnot at, 9 o'clock, we're eating I think it's like a requirement to eat the bowl of cereal at that point.
Yes. Yes,
The bowl of
definitely.
cereal. Like that it fits, right? And so that sort of became the system. And then it was great for my spouse and I. We could use those same ingredients to create something for lunch. My spouse, he loves buffalo sauce on everything. Could take chicken, rice, broccoli, buffalo sauce. It was fine. I mean, he's used to having eaten, MREs and stuff in the field in the Army. So he's not terribly picky about it, and likes that. Works for me. Throw some black beans in there, whatever. And then I could add mine on top of, mixed greens and whatever I wanted to make a cold salad bowl sort of concoction. So that's where we started with the process, was figuring out, I kind of went through a couple steps there, figuring out, number one, what are we actually going to eat? Because if you're not going to eat it, it's just thrown away. It doesn't save you then time or money. What are ways that those things can combine together? It was sort of like mix and match. So we didn't get tired of eating it. Yes, it was the same things a lot of the time, but they could be combined and use different sauces or flavors to create some different things. And then only knowing that we had enough to get us through, if we could get through Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday of the week, and I didn't have to think about coming home from a long day, new into a job too. So there was a lot more draining. I just knew we could just heat up whatever, sit down and eat and carry on. And I also didn't have to worry about the kids not having something accessible to them when the time was right for them to eat. So in general, that worked. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday was pretty much taken care of. And then Thursdays, I would generally put something, maybe I'd have something ready to go in the crock pot, or I would know, okay, here's a quick thing that I can fix on Thursdays. Interestingly enough, that pattern quickly became breakfast for dinner on Thursdays.
I love that.
Which was actually like we stuck with for a long time. Because again, with schedules and things, we weren't eating, the home cooked full type of breakfast situation. Maybe on the weekends occasionally, but even then, not really. So that was sort of a treat, to have waffles and scrambled eggs or omelets and fruit or whatever it might look like. And those are generally, for me, were pretty quick. 30 minutes maybe to do those things. And then Friday, I would look forward to actually cooking. Like when I would get home, kind of a way to unwind, move into the weekend, I would generally grill something, fresh that again gave us something to eat Saturday for lunch, that type of thing. But the reality was at the start to just come up with things that I didn't have to think about it. Mm-hmm. And everyone could make their own. And so we weren't eating the same thing over and over again. Like I know some people have a real aversion to leftovers. I personally, I don't mind leftovers. I eat them generally every day for lunch. But I understand I would want to make one thing at the beginning of the week and then have to eat that for lunch and dinner. It might get old. So having the way to kind of change things up and jazz them up a little differently worked. But it meant that on Saturdays when I would go to the store or Sunday, I was buying kind of the same stuff, which actually then made our food budget was predictable for the most part. Because and again, it sort of automated the grocery buying process. I knew I was buying, a flat iron steak, the salmon, the chicken, the veggies were pretty much the same, and then a few little things from whatever we needed, or something a little different from time to time. But that was sort of the mix and match meal plan that got us through pretty 2 full years of very busy high school kids, and 2 adults working outside the house, and allowed me to still cook, and do the things that I enjoyed, to get those things ready.
I think one of the things that stands out to me about that plan too is that everybody has their own autonomy around what they're eating, and that the only work that you're not putting in that additional work of feeding people, or sort of the catering to people. I think part of what I think is so important about that is you're not deciding, okay, everybody, here's what we're eating. And you're not having to do that work of like, here's how this is going to be something that works for you. You're deciding, you're sort of just taking care of that like least common denominator of like, what's the available food going to be? And then it's up to everybody else to be able to decide how that's going to work for them. That I think oftentimes, there's lots of other things that get layered on top of that, especially for moms of, okay, it's your job not only to figure out what food we need and to do the grocery shopping and to do all the meal prepping, but then I think there's a lot of other hidden layers, hidden tasks in there of like, okay, and now I have to figure out how to make this work for you, or, that extra sort of emotional labor piece or whatever. So I'm curious for you, if you have thoughts about kind of cultivating that environment and those relationships so that you're not also worrying about, oh, well, here's how you can make this sort of do you see what I'm saying? Like how it's sort of everybody still being responsible for their own eating and you're just responsible for the kind of big picture part.
Right. I think that some of that started really early on. Like I said, I grew up in a big food family. As I've learned the term, I grew up in an ingredient household, big Italian family. And that was it was both a social, sorry, the dogs are visiting. It was kind of a social part, an aspect of it. And then for a number of reasons, it was something that I enjoy doing. I enjoy cooking. I enjoy making food for people. So I was naturally drawn to continue that. But I think from a very early age, as a mom with young kids and being the primary person, doing all the caring and feeding, in their earliest years, it was important for me for me as an adult to not only model, but also help to teach them, these are why certain foods, we used to talk about superfoods, right? There are certain foods that are superfoods because they're super good for our body. And I'm sure that was probably on some kids programming. I didn't come up with that on my own. But we talked about like nothing was off limits, but there were things that we needed to make sure our bodies got to feel their best and to have energy. So I think we started those conversations, and I particularly started those conversations with both of my kids when they were young. And it was just something that they saw in our family. It wasn't a desserts only for the weekend or, like that kind of narrative. I really steered clear of because it was not super helpful to me as a child. And I knew I was carrying a lot of that baggage. But at the same time, understanding that they had preferences, right? And using that language, right? It's okay if you prefer it this way. But I encouraged both of my kids to tell me that. Like, I don't like it that way. Okay. And there was some of that, the load of knowing like, okay, well, the older one has never liked seafood ever. Tried it, has done all of the things. Hard pass. That's okay in my mind. You don't have to eat fish or seafood. Your body does need protein, but there's a lot of ways for us to get that. And so if I was fixing something that was seafood, I would always make sure that like there was either some leftover chicken or another option that could just be substituted in. I never made it a big deal. A dietitian who I saw speak about talking about young kids, big deals become battles, stuck with me. So I'm like, it doesn't hurt my feelings if you're like, I don't care. I don't care for salmon. Thank you for sharing that. Would you like some chicken or whatever instead? And then there are certain like weird things with especially young kids. Pork tenderloin, fine. Shredded pork, totally different meat, apparently.
Yep.
And so there are those seasons with young kids. You're like, it is this literally the same piece of meat. So we had some of those moments, but for the most part, they knew I tried to fix things that were seasoned but not strong too. So they always, garlic, pepper, onion, whatever. It was always cooked with their foods from the time they were old enough to have those things, which was pretty young, really. But I wouldn't add, like, if I was making, for example, grilled chicken, it would be seasoned, not just plain. But I wouldn't put the barbecue sauce on it or the whatever, like the strong thing on it, so they could choose if they wanted something to dip it in, if they wanted to pour it on. And I think that those things early on allowed me, number one, to learn what their current preference was, but also sort of allowed me to kind of take a step back and understand that if I left things where they did have a choice, for example, like we're having chicken, broccoli, and mashed potatoes for dinner, they would eat it. One might choose to put barbecue sauce on it. One went through a honey mustard phase, whatever. Like, sure, if you're like, fed is best, right? If you're eating the food and you're eating a variety of food that your body needs, then that's good. So I think it really started with really early conversations and sort of an approach to food that my relationship with my kids and the environment while we were eating being calm and even playful was more important than being super stringent, like, this is what I fixed, and if you don't like it, I know there are different approaches. I was never that you're going to go to bed hungry. If you don't eat this, you can't. There was always a way, because again, the big deals became battles, and I just really worked to not have the battle. So, and allowed my kids to express that early on. And I did not take it personally. They weren't, this kind of goes off on a little bit of a tangent. Like the kids saying, I don't like that. I honored them saying they don't like it. I might ask, well, what about it don't you like? Again, shredded versus pork tenderloin. I'm like, I can't, they're the logic of a 4-year-old and okay, all right, well, next time I'll fix, next time we'll have it that way. no one's going to win that discussion. Right. But at the same time, I'm not taking it personally. They're not saying you're the worst cook ever. I hate you and all the food you make. They're trying to express what they want. So that was helpful and continued. And even now, I know one kid, mushrooms are not a problem. The other is violently opposed to mushrooms contaminating their food. So doesn't mind the flavor of them though, but just doesn't want to eat them. So if they are home and I'm making something, beef bourguignon or something that I personally think mushrooms should be in, I just leave them bigger. They are easy to just scoot to the edge of the plate. And they know, even to this day, I will reach over with my fork and steal their mushrooms. Or they cannot scoop them out of the serving dish, right? They can be left behind. Again, if you don't want to eat the mushrooms, don't eat the mushrooms. It's not going to hurt my feelings. It means I get more of them, which is good. right? And so I think being attuned to the things that they like. My spouse does not love melty cheese. Pains my heart as an Italian. No melty cheese.
Yeah, I was gonna say, oof.
I know, right? I'm like, but we've made it work for over 25 years now. Um, so there are things that I might fix, and I don't put the cheese on it. I put it on my portion. Not a big deal. It doesn't mess things up. Or if I really want the super cheesy whatever something, I might have that, and he might have the leftover steak with all the other pieces. Again, I think thinking of the meals as like having components has always helped. And if you think about it, like there's not a big difference between nachos and tacos. And a bowl, right? Like they can all be the same thing. It's the conveyance that changes. But some people really prefer one over the other. Sometimes for ease, sometimes because you know, it 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 takes on um a different experience, let's say, eating a hard taco versus nachos. I get it. It's like the 4-year-old logic. They're different. Sliced cheese versus shredded cheese. Again, that's a whole other.
Yep.
You want to get people talking. Ask them which one's better. So I think that really having those conversations and just understanding that I too have my preferences.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that we forget then that other people do. So as the primary food preparer and purchaser in our family for a long time, you just need to let me know.
Mm-hmm.
Because it makes everybody's life easier. So if there's something particular you like, or something particular that you really don't care for, share it, express it, and we can try to work around it. And sometimes that means that maybe that person is having a meal that looks a little different, and it might look strange for them to have all the pieces and then it's like one of these things is not like the other.
Yep.
But it works. Again, I just don't make a big deal about it.
And this is a system where at some point everybody's going to be having the dish that they want. It's not like there's one kid who's always having to have leftovers, instead of the fresh food that you're cooking. Like sometimes that's going to be what they're doing, but everybody, it sounds like, is having a night where maybe that's an option for them. And that everybody is going to be having things regularly that they do really enjoy as the sort of main dish of the day or the night.
Right. And the beauty of kind of that mix and match system early on was that everybody really could tailor it to what they want. Like I said, my spouse would put buffalo sauce and spicy on as much as he could because that's what he really likes. Great. I would like to be able to like that, but my stomach thinks otherwise. And so you can be a little creative with it. Try different flavors. I will say we have like a spinning insert in our refrigerator. The variety of sauces and such that are on there became a little wild because ooh, I could put this on, right? And but that was the way we tailored a lot of the meals, both to make them different. So it maybe wasn't the same thing. If you were having, chicken, rice, and veggies for lunch and for dinner. Well, one for lunch, it was a Tex-Mex theme, whatever. And at dinner, I might add, basil pesto and whatever, and have it be more Mediterranean flair or whatever. So we had a lot of the extras, like my kids used to call it when they were little, the sprinkles. They were, and so I'm like, yeah, but it made it taste different, but we could all tailor what we needed at that time. And also growing teenagers, very active. My spouse and I, we all had very different overall caloric needs. Mm-hmm. And so it was easier for us to individualize what we might need, depending on what our schedule looked like during the week, right? My spouse, would need more like heavy, in my mind-boggling amounts of carbs like Fridays and Saturdays prior to doing a long bike ride on Sundays. Um, you know, I didn't necessarily need a big pasta dinner kind of thing for me, but he could really pile that on, because there was, you could accommodate for that when the pieces come together. I wanted, a more veggie heavy, and veggie forward kind of meals for lunch most days. That just works well for me. So I was able to tailor that as well, so we could kind of meet the different needs, uh, and leave out the things, leave the things separate that people had strong feelings about. One kiddo really liked beans, yay. The other one, not so much. And so I could just leave those separate where you would want, black beans or whatever tossed in. Perfect. And if you didn't want them, you didn't have to worry. You're not trying to pick around everything. I do make them pick around the mushrooms, but
Well, so I was going to say, that is a season that is perhaps not the one that you're currently in. And so I'm curious about how some of this approach to meal planning has shifted as your life and circumstances have changed.
yeah, it's definitely a different season. It's just my spouse and I at home now. The kids are only home for a couple days over breaks. They're both at college. So that looks wildly different when they're home. But in general, some of the pieces have stuck. I still buy a lot of the same things, but one of the things that I realized that I wasn't expecting is how much I missed being able to cook regularly, right? In that high school age kid season, on Sunday afternoons, I would generally spend, 2 or 3 hours in the kitchen, kind of getting all of the things ready and put away for the week, and had a list on the fridge so everybody knew sort of what was in there, which I didn't need once we got going into it, right? But I felt a little like disjointed, like something was not quite right. And in retrospect, I realized it was because I wasn't having that time to kind of unwind and cook. So as our schedules became just two adults with a more predictable kind of schedule, we tend to eat dinner together at night because we can say, hey, dinner around 6, and we're both generally here. I still prep some things, but I don't cook as much at one time. So it's funny. It still happens on Sunday nights. We almost always have salmon on Sunday night. My spouse doesn't bring salmon to work. No reheating fish in the work microwave.
Right. That's an important rule.
It's a rule, right? And so I'll make that on Sundays for us to have. But I'll make another protein. Generally, I'll grill some chicken or cook something else up on Sundays as well. So then we have another protein choice for lunch, Monday, Tuesday kind of thing. I will take salmon to work as a leftover because I don't reheat it. I eat it as part of a cold salad type of thing. So that's changed a little bit where I'm not preparing as much on Sundays. I might just cook an extra protein to make sure normally it's grilled chicken. I just make sure we have a little extra that can go with whatever. But I am more in the habit now of coming home and cooking dinner or part of dinner because I enjoy that kind of downtime. I'm usually home 30 minutes or more ahead of time. And after my recent 2 weeks of hotel living for a conference, I realized how much I missed being able to come home, put music on the kitchen speaker, have my own little karaoke party while I'm, chopping vegetables or whatever I'm doing. For me, that was an important part of the unwind from the day and kind of letting things go. And I missed that piece when I was cooking a ton on Sunday to get us through the Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. So now it's probably every other night I'll cook versus having a ton of things available It's just the two of us too. We don't need as much food. So some things then go in the freezer too, which help. You know, 2 portions of grilled chicken or whatever, so that there's things to pull from when schedules change or when one of us is traveling. And so it's more normal. I still plan for the week as far as, so I try to only just go to the store the one time. And so I know that, you know, if I fix this, like I said, for what, again, not intentional, but it was just like, oh, salmon on Sunday. Um, we look forward, you know, to having that. And then I can, like today, for example, I knew I'm going into the office later. I will probably stay at the office later. So the crock pot is currently working on dinner. And when I come home, I'll just fix a batch of rice to eat with the goodies that the crock pot is currently doing the work for. So it has changed a little bit, but I still think through what are the options then for us, because we both bring lunch to work when I'm in the office now most of the time too. So what do we both want to be able to, you know, bring for lunches? And that helps, but it is different. I've had to adjust to only, you know, cooking for just the two of us. And we can have some of the things that we enjoy more, you know, with the things that we like. Although there are still nights, last night, for example, we both ate completely different leftovers. You would not have known we had gotten the food from the same spot. It all came from our fridge, but totally different based on what was available and kind of what we were in the mood for. So, you know, I had a pulled pork sandwich and veggies and fruit, and my spouse had leftover salmon and all the other goodies that went along with that. But we were able to sit down at the same time, which, you know, he and I generally have been able to do. But yeah, so it does look different, but I've regained a little bit of the time each day rather than front loading it to fit. Where front loading it on Sundays, you know, or over the weekend allowed me more time during the week, during that season of busy, where now I have a little more time in the evenings that I'm not running back and forth to a rehearsal or practice. Like it is amazing. People say like, oh, you know, with empty nesting, what's that like? I'm like, in some ways you gain back some time that you're not shuttling and attending things at the same rate. So I can have my little sing along in the kitchen and enjoy a little food prep in the evening to just kind of unwind and then enjoy a meal. But it's good when I know I'm going to be traveling too. I can fall back on some of those previous seasons of practice of either loading the freezer with things or prepping things for me to take with me if I'm going to be away for work too.
So much of this also, I think, involves skills that you build over time. You know, something that I've noticed for myself with meal planning and cooking is that things take less time as you get used to it. You know, even just like prepping veggies, like used to take 20 or 30 minutes and now is not so long for me that I've got the knife skills to chop onions, and I'm not spending all the time looking back and thinking, oh, what is it that I actually need for this recipe? And that a lot of that, I think, builds over time to get so much easier. And even with the grocery store, right? Like the more familiar you are with what you need and how long it takes to cook it, and all of that starts to save time that when you're just starting out with this kind of thing, like it takes longer. It is harder. And I think that's another big thing for folks that are starting out or trying to explore this more, is that it's going to take you a much longer time than you think it is. And it won't be like that forever.
Absolutely. I mean, some of this, I mean, I've been doing for literally forever. I mean, for at least 30 years at this point that I've been on my own, cooking, shopping, cooking, feeding myself and then others. I think the one thing too, kind of back to the point of, you know, think about the things you actually will eat, right? So what you'll actually eat, and start small, right? That would be my other tip, right? Think about the things that you know you're going to eat, that you generally are going to reach for in a busy moment, after a long day, during periods of stress. Think about those things and focus on those and start small. For me, dinners were the part where I needed the focus. Um, but maybe for some people, maybe it means, hey, just think about what you want to grab on your way out the door for breakfast. If that's what will suit you. And then just add on to it, right? See how that goes, test it out. And I think too, give yourself a chance to say, this does not work this way. It doesn't mean that meal planning doesn't work. It just means that particular way maybe isn't meeting what you need. Identify what the challenge is. If all you're worried about is bringing lunch to work, then figure out what that looks like. And that might mean, there's nothing wrong with a sandwich and a piece of fruit and a bag of chips, right? Like it doesn't, I think too, people think meal planning, like it's some grandiose, you know, Michelin star meal every night. No, it's not. It could be if that floats your boat and that's what you want, fantastic. But I think being realistic, and understanding too, take the shortcuts that you can where it makes sense. One of the things, and this is, uh, I I will never buy the head of broccoli. Never,
Yeah.
never, ever. I will buy the family size bag of florets from Costco or the grocery store. I will. And you know why? Because we will eat that whole bag in a week at least. And it's easier. It's one, I don't have to chop the things, right? I generally enjoy that. But broccoli to me, I'm like, why? And I've done the cost comparison. It's really not that much of a difference. It's pennies when I realize I'm generally taking that whole stalk and chucking it anyway. So,
Mhm.
Individual results may vary, but for me, the giant bag of broccoli is always going to be more economical, because we eat it and it's quick. It takes me 4 minutes. Take out a couple handfuls, put them in a bowl, water, lid, microwave, done. Like easy. But other things too, when it comes to meal planning, don't forget the frozen aisle. Okay. Again, because of dietary stuff, I can't buy a lot of the pre-done meals. But I can tell you today in my crock pot is a bag of frozen onions, a bag of the frozen mixed peppers, and frozen chicken tenderloins, and some seasoning and, whatever. But that,
Liquid, I assume too, but
right.
yeah.
But could I? And on another day, that might have been me chopping fresh onions this morning, cutting up bell peppers, whatever. But when I went to the grocery store because of the snowstorm and stuff, the fresh vegetables were not looking superb. And so I just ran back to the freezer section and grabbed them. I'm like, because I knew I wanted to do that as a meal option this week. But again, that can be a convenience and super inexpensive and just as healthy. Like it's just as good. The texture is a little different when they're cooked in the crock pot, but really not that much. It's the crock pot. I'm not expecting crunchy peppers. So find ways that you can make it a little bit easier for yourself. Um, you know, Sometimes buying the big container of yogurt makes sense, but maybe it really makes sense for you to buy the individual cups of yogurt and you just throw in a container of fruit or whatever that you're going to toss with it. Maybe it means you're buying the one that has the yogurt and the little flippy thing that has the again, so use the shortcuts that are available, and those modifications if it gets you to your end goal, right? Because
Mhm.
if your goal is, I want to eat more nutrient forward meals, or I want to spend less, I don't want to grab the yogurt parfait at the grab and go cafe, the one at the grocery store is going to be cheaper, and then you can work from there, right? See what works and then fine tune it, rather than trying to plan it down to like the absolute most efficient and cost effective. See what works first, and then you'll find those natural spaces where there's more efficiency, whether it's time or economics, right? Knife skills are a huge thing. A lot of people hate chopping and they think it's a pain and it takes forever because they don't they don't know how to do it yet, or they don't know how to do it well.
Mm-hmm.
So some YouTube videos and an at-home knife sharpener. Like, you don't need my favorite knife, and this is, I mean, and I come from a long family of cooks and restaurant people. My absolute favorite knife is probably 15 years old, and it's from IKEA.
Yeah.
But it's regularly sharpened, and I love that thing. It goes up against any other fancy knife that I have, and it is my most used, right? But again, because I've learned how I take care of it, and I've learned the knife skills to make all the chopping and cutting super easy. So there's a lot of skill development that can happen as part of it, for sure. But I think start with the things you know you're going to eat. Look at the ways to create those most efficiently, to test out and see, like, is this going to work? And then just add on or adapt, as you need. And the great thing is too, if in doing this, you and the people who are in your, sharing a refrigerator with you, sharing that kitchen space, find out the things that you do like, then you wind up not wasting time and energy and effort on things that aren't enjoyable or aren't liked, or wind up just sitting, becoming a chemistry experience, biology, thing in the back of the back of the refrigerator. So I did find that, thinking about it that way, while yes, I may spend a little more for certain things, because I want them prepared in a certain way, or, the bag of broccoli, pennies difference, but it all gets eaten. So we're not wasting stuff. Isn't sitting in the back like, oh, we have nothing to eat with that now, and it gets thrown away. So our food waste is much reduced too, which wasn't my goal, necessarily at the start of these thoughts, even, years and years ago, but has been a nice part of kind of this process. But it doesn't happen overnight. And it, start small with the things that work for you, and then, give it a little bit of thought and add from there. It shouldn't be harder overall, once you find what works.
Mm-hmm. There's so much in here, I think, that's really helpful for folks that are trying to wrangle their meal planning. Do you have any final thoughts or nuggets or suggestions for folks that are exploring meal planning as something they can do?
I think really make it work for you. My meal plan, if I were to write it out, may not work for someone else. That doesn't mean my meal plan isn't good. It's great for me. But understand that a lot of what you may see floating around is sort of the in a perfect world where, know where you are, what your current skills and your capacity is for doing this. Start small and use the pieces that work for you, and let it develop within whatever season you're in, or whatever your real needs are. It needs to meet what your primary needs are, and that will make it something you're willing to stick with. But yeah, really just make the meal plan work for you. You shouldn't be working for the meal plan.
Such great advice. Kelly, thank you so much for bringing us through all of these different ideas and fleshing out what some of this can look like in real life. Really appreciate your sharing all of this.
Well, it's been great to be with you again, and hopefully some of the tips are helpful, or will get people thinking about making meal plans work for them.
Sadly, that brings us to the end of this podcast. Now here's my standard disclaimer. The podcast is something you can do, not things you must or even should do. Some of our action items might not work for you, and that's okay. This podcast is to help inspire you to think and act differently. If you liked the episode, like, share, subscribe, leave us a 5-star review, especially on Apple Podcasts. I don't know why, but that's the one where all the reviews are. If you didn't like it, send me a strongly worded email to sycdpodcast@gmail.com. And either way, give us a follow at SomethingYouCanDoPod on Instagram. Thanks a bunch and see you soon.